All right, so let's look at a lot of stuff very briefly, I hope, but looking at the similarities in these theories. I am, you're not going to, find anything on identity theories as a theory. This is my own sort of way of linking these things together. So again, here we are. Let's back up a little bit. So, critical theories, yay. Lois Tyson. This is a lot of the way I package this has come from her book. And what I'm doing is grouping feminism, African American criticism, and the different yet similar cultural criticism techniques of lesbian theory, gay theory, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. It's a bit of a misnomer to say it's encompassing all of that. Critical theory is being really slow to catch up and create a trans literary theory, although there have been some progress in that. But the whole LGBTQIA does share certain aspects that can be useful for critical theory. And all of them, all of these are based on identity. A woman, if you are queer, to use the simple, very reductive term, and if you are of African American heritage. And there are other theories too, other ways that you can analyze things based on race. That's generally put in the big picture of post-colonial theory. Post-colonial theory and African American criticism have a lot in common also. What I'm doing is just trying to distill just trying to give you some very simple ways of taking these ways of viewing cultural products so that we can use them in class. As I said in the other lecture, the purpose of this class is not to teach you, is go into great depth about these. They're simply to give you a little handle that you can put on give you terms and ways to help analyze things. But I do want to acknowledge how potentially offensive it might be to some and how reductive it is to maybe group these together and spend so little time on them. But I do think there are some useful things that we can take away from a quick look at these theories. So let's look at things that all the theories share, and then we'll take a real brief look at some things that are specific to each one. So the term patriarchy is something that all of these identity theories can that utilize directly, some very directly, some less so, but still, the idea that we live in a world that basically the world, at least the Western world, the US definitely, is owned by white straight men, and that there is an attempt for the people in power to hold their position in power, and that's living in the white straight world is called the patriarchy, and the fact that most of everything revolves around power structures that favor white straight men, and all of these theories also would agree that the patriarchy is harmful, that there are a whole lot more negative effects than there are positive effects. And it's not only harmful to the people it marginalizes. I just want to take a second and talk about that word. Some of you surely know what it means, but some of you might not. If you have been marginalized, I mean, think about the margins of a paper. You are pushed out to the sides. You are not important. And that term is generally referred to people of color, women, people of alternate sexualities. Basically, if you're not a straight white male, you are marginalized in some way by the patriarchy. But especially feminism, also argues that patriarchy is actually harmful to straight white men too. The idea that men are not allowed to cry, the idea that men have heart attacks at a younger age. Usually it's changing, but the fact that, historically men have died earlier, we can logically attribute to the fact that the patriarchy, the way our power structure works, the way that men are expected to do things. So we're not just, this isn't just a bunch of queers and women and people of color who are just saying, hey, it sucks to not own everything. There is a logical reasoning to the things that they're arguing. And I said before that these theories can be quite political. These definitely do go that way. So anyway, let's proceed. The idea of biological essentialism, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, just the meaning of those words. The idea that there is something essentially true to biology, that men are stronger than women, that and there are a whole lot of horribly offensive things that think about, historically what people have used to argue that why did a lot of people who believed in slavery believed that black people were innately intellectually inferior. So that idea that there is an essence to biology. Of course, we don't believe that these days. Possibly, yes. Sure, most men probably have more upper body strength than most women, but to say that sort of that the biology produces quality is offensive, and it's something that all of these theories utilize and try to resist. The idea that identity is constructed socially, that goes hand in hand with biological essentialism. The idea that the man is supposed to be the breadwinner and the head of the household, and the woman is supposed to, stay home and be weaker and take care of the children. That is a construction of society. There's nothing about being female that necessitates that you can't have a job and you can't be strong. There's nothing about, so all these things that we might attribute to as parts of identity are actually socially constructed. That definitely feeds into queer theory, where, the idea that gender is a social construction as well. And I should acknowledge here, acknowledging my own subjectivity, is that I am much more versed in queer theory than I am in feminism or African American theory. So if it seems that I'm coming at you from the perspective of that way, yes, it's true. It's just where in college I did a lot of studying queer theory. But when you study those queer theory, you have to study feminism and other marginalized theories, as well as postmodernism, which we'll get to later. The idea of sort of a political positioning, being a separatist, a liberalist, or an assimilationist, are three ideas that these theories that you could argue in all of them. Separatist, if you're a feminist separatist, you want to live in a world with only women. If you were an African American separatist, you would want to live in a world that is just people of your race. And again, not many people argue this. Most probably would go along the lines of being a liberalist, that, we can all live in this world and we all have a lot to contribute and we should interact and feed off of each other. But you, patriarchy, is going to have to do the most changing because you are used to being in power, and that is wrong. So a liberalist still firmly believes that, obviously. And then there's assimilationist that don't necessarily believe that it's wrong. They just want to live their life and be part of this culture. This is actually a bigger thing in post-colonial theory, where Western culture might have, a Western power probably colonized a country or a region or something, and then everybody in that region that they colonized suddenly wants to be like the culture that dominated them. And that brings up a whole lot of problems. The idea of institutionalized marginalization is something that all of these theories have in common. The patriarchy has structured things, intentionally or unintentionally, depends on how mad you are, to maintain power, and therefore, like the idea, why do women earn less? It's because it's institutionalized. Why are prisons overwhelmingly full of African Americans and have much fewer white people, it's because of institutionalized problems. That the patriarchy has organized society so that it favors white, straight men. That's institutionalized marginalization. In marginalization, fill in the blank. Institutionalized racism, institutionalized misogyny, institutionalized homophobia, all that kind of stuff. The term othering is an interesting term. It means that you are not like me. You are other. Generally, when we use the term other, we mean the marginalized individuals. So the main people of a culture would be the straight white males, and if you are not that, you are other. That's a very simple little word, but it's a really effective term that is utilized frequently in these theories. So let's jump into feminism. Again, if you are interested in feminism, which I hope you are, because we all benefit from the teaching and the theories and the history of feminism, I strongly encourage you to take a women's studies course. If you have taken a women's studies course, you already know far more than I'm going to present right here. I'm just giving the down and dirty basics to give us a way to look at plays and productions. So, feminism, what does it do? It examines the way cultural products reinforce or undermine economic, political, and psychological oppression of women. That's what it does. Kind of common sense. And I want to pause here just for 1 second. And when I was teaching in South Carolina and I would introduce feminism, I would always ask my students, how many of you identify as a feminist? And in a class of 25, maybe 2 would raise their hands. And then I would ask, how many of you believe that if a woman does the exact same work that a man does, she should be paid the same amount of money? And everybody, literally everybody, would raise their hands. And then I would say, well, I'm sorry, but I've got news for you. You're all feminists. Being a feminist does not mean being a bra burner or being a man hater. It simply means that there's a really famous quote that says, feminism is the radical notion that women are people too. So that's all feminism means. That's all it takes to be a feminist. I found that in the Pacific Northwest, it's a lot more common for people to identify as a feminist, and it could be that the progression of time, feminism has some people believe you don't have to be a man hater, but anyway, that's just an interesting little thing. And it wasn't that long ago that I was teaching in South Carolina, so we have a lot of work to do as in terms of creating equality for everyone. But remember, that's not the purpose of these. It's not purpose to get political, although you easily can. It's to give us a lens to identify plays and productions. So you could argue that feminism is the mother of all identities, with using that kind of a play on words there, a mother of all identities, and has a very, very long history. And I am not qualified to teach that right now, so take a women's studies class. And I am not going to take the time to do that. There are many different types of feminism. When I just briefly hit on radical versus liberal versus assimilationist, there's a cultural feminism. There are many different levels, if you will, of feminism. Feminism also has a long history of a racial divide. The early feminists were overwhelmingly straight and white, and a lot of people of color really had a problem with the way that early feminists prioritized whiteness. And now there are obviously efforts to overcome that, but feminism has a long history. But what we're looking at right now is simply, just looking at analyzing place from a feminist point of view. Some basic beliefs of feminism is that patriarchy oppresses women, patriarchy others women, and sex is biological and gender is culturally determined. Now, this could be evolving too. I should say, no, it's not evolving necessarily. The idea that sex is biological. Now, there are a lot of challenges to that, as we're learning more and more, and we are opening up as a culture and medicine is opening up to reveal the presence, how many intersex individuals there are. So I predict this is going to evolve too, if not already. But generally, historical feminism says that yes, sex, sure, that's a thing, but it's only science, gender, and the roles and the rules you put on gender are simply created by society, created by culture. And I already hit on that. All these theories kind of believe that, but feminism is definitely founded on that. Couple of terms. The male gaze is a really important term when we're talking about art and feminism. The male gaze is the assumption that works of art are created for men to look at them. So a statue of like the statue of David, the very the muscular, aesthetically pleasing, beautiful male figure is seen as homoerotic because the assumption is that a man is the one looking at it. Well, it's not homoerotic if you are a straight identified female looking at it. So, and the other way that this really, that's a very simple way of looking at it. The male gaze becomes destructive when we look at especially popular culture like horror movies, in which why is it that when the cheerleader gets murdered by the axe murderer, that her top has to be ripped off? When the hot football player is murdered, he's not seen as a sexual object. That's basically what a lot of it comes down to. Again, please note that I am being very simple about this, but there are many layers to all of these things. But basically, the male gaze can be reduced down to assuming that works of art, especially visual things, because we're saying the gaze here, are created for the sexual fulfillment or for men, and that women are objectified. They're seen as objects, which is unhealthy for many people. And then there's also the idea of the patriarchal woman. That's a woman who willingly, knowingly participates in the patriarchy, assumes her place, and is okay with that, or claims to be okay with that. A lot of feminists would have a problem with that. So, two terms that can be useful when we are analyzing works of art from a feminist perspective. So, I'm going to have to float around a bit so you can see what's going on. So when you are analyzing a play or production from a feminist perspective, some questions to ask yourself. What does the play say about women? That's kind of obvious. Does it say that women deserve to be subjugated? Does it say that women need to be more powerful? Basically what is the message that the play is giving out? And you could argue that maybe there isn't one, especially when we get into postmodernism. But if you can, it's worth asking yourself that. What does the play reveal about patriarchy? Is it saying that, hey, society as it is fine? Is it saying, ooh, we need to change to try to have more equality, what have you? What does the play say about the ways in which race, class, and other factors intersect with gender and the woman's experience? So looking at many aspects of society as presented by the play, as represented by the play. You can also say, how does the play reflect society at the time? And what does it say about the women's experience? How does the play define masculine and feminine? Are there certain unstated, or stated possibly, but more likely unstated, system of beliefs that the play is sort of reinforcing? What does the play imply about the possibility of sisterhood as a mode of resistance? One of the sort of thoughts in feminist theory is that one of the ways that the patriarchy keeps women in their place is by making women compete with each other. The idea that and this is all over popular culture. The cheerleaders that you've heard that joke that, when one woman looks at another woman, she looks like she's smelling onions. That whole competition between women actually serves the patriarchy, and it's detrimental to progressing in a world of equality. So what does, where was I? Yeah, sisterhood there are a lot of feminist plays that show women working together, or women having to overcome obstacles so that they can work together to achieve what is beneficial for everybody involved. Remember, all of these terms can be asked in terms of intentionality or in an unintentional way? Did the playwright mean to say that women deserve to stay in their place, or were they trying to be feminist, but they actually really weren't? It's easier to ask that question for classic plays and old plays because they didn't have these theories and they didn't have people saying, "Hey, by the way, when you do that, you're oppressing me." So I do want to very quickly bring up a play called Night Mother by Marcia Norman. It is a play in which I used to have students read it in Intro to Theater. It's a really good play for scenes and monologues for 25 to 45 female of that age. A woman who has epilepsy and has a son who's basically in prison. She's not been a good mother. Her son has suffered because of it. She is basically the caretaker for her mother. She has decided that she's going to commit suicide, and this whole play takes place over the evening where the mother is trying to explain, where the daughter is explaining to the mother basically how to live your life. Here's where the pots and pans are. Here's your medicine, because the mother has become extremely reliant on the daughter and would be at a total loss. And the only thing that's keeping the daughter around is being her mother's caretaker. And she's decided that that is not a good enough reason to stay alive. That the play is genius. I believe it won a Pulitzer Prize, but it is a frighteningly logical argument for suicide. It's not. Anyway, but that's not the point. That's not the reason I'm bringing it up. I directed a reading of this for my students at the time, and I asked them, oh, my computer's doing crazy stuff. I asked them, because when we were looking at the play from a feminist perspective, they were having a hard time saying, well, I don't get it. But then I asked them, now what if this were a father and a son? How would that change the meaning of the play? And that's when the lights went off, because men are not caretakers of their fathers in this way. It was a very enlightening way of looking at the play. So that might be a way to find your way into a feminist analysis. Ask yourself, what if the genders were switched? What if they were not women? Anyway, I'm going to move forward because I don't want this lecture to go too horribly long, and I still have other things to cover. So let's look at queer theory, just for the lack of a better term. As I said before, we have a lot to unpack with this, especially with just those initials. Most theories, when queer theory, when LGBT, LGB, or lesbian and gay theory first became a thing, it was very much just about lesbian and gay. Now with the advance and hopefully continued rights of trans people and other individuals, queer theory is sort of a better way to think about this, because the idea is, especially when you're looking at gay men, the gay male culture has really had to confront its whiteness, and there are some ways of analyzing plays from a gay perspective that really can be kind of offensive. It's assuming whiteness, and it's assuming privilege, because after all, a white male can pass in the world, but a woman can't, and a person of color can't, and trans people can or cannot, based on where they are and who they are. So there's a whole lot to unpack here that we probably just really don't have time to do, but just some terms to throw out there. We all know what it means to be homophobic, internalized homophobia, and hatred of the self based on your sexual identity. The term compulsory heterosexuality is the idea that in order to be a fully participating member of society, it is compulsory that you are heterosexual. The term heteronormativity, that it's just normal to be hetero. That's some terms that are useful in a queer analysis. The term homoerotic versus homosocial, a connection, a same-sex sexual connection versus a same-sex social connection. A lot of works of literature, for example, have had homosocial characters that were really a thinly veiled homoerotic relationship. But that distinguishing between homoerotic and homosocial is a useful term to have in our pocket. A woman-identified woman is a woman whose identity is based on her relationship with other women. It could be sexual, doesn't have to be. That comes from lesbian theory. Separatist, there's also probably more common for a lesbian culture, the idea of pulling away from the patriarchy completely, and living in a female world. Coded languages and images, that's really important. The idea of things, of secret references and coded ways of communicating with each other came out of the beginning of the gay and lesbian life, gay and lesbian life. There were coded things. For example, if you asked someone else if they were family, that was code for "Are you gay?" And that's a very simple example. But and within works of art, there are coded ways of referring to characters. A lot of female characters that are sort of hyper-feminized are actually thought to be gay surrogates. For example, in the play Streetcar Named Desire, the character Blanche is often seen as a substitute for Tennessee Williams, the playwright, who was a gay male. So just in certain images and certain things just within the culture, but have become very common. For example, some of you might not be aware that the movie The Wizard of Oz is considered a touchstone for gay culture, gay male culture specifically, because supposedly the movie was playing on the TV when Stonewall riots happened. Well, the term "Are you a friend of Dorothy?" is code for "Are you gay?" And there are all these sort of codes and images and things in all aspects of all the wide range of queer theory and queer identity. Something that is generally associated with gay male theory, but not necessarily anymore, the idea of camp and drag. Camp is a very broad performance style, usually funny, usually comedic, but it's very exaggerated. Drag is not the only example of camp, but it's a really good example of camp. Something can be campy. Anything can be campy, and this is probably a term you've heard before. It's just a term. It's campy. It's exaggerated. It's frivolous. It's over the top, or what have you. I mean, you could have a campy set of curtains on your window, or to look at drag specifically. What does drag do? It exaggerates feminine. The huge hair, the outlandish makeup, the tight skirts, the high heels, sometimes an exaggerated voice, and whatever. So drag and camp, all types of camp, and drag being a type of camp, it's not just to be funny. If you look at it deeply enough, it's very subversive. Camp deconstructs what it means to be a woman. It makes it ridiculous to a point. Now, of course, there are all types of drag performers. There are some that strive to look, quote, real, but most, especially those pictured here, don't. They're deconstructing our society by exaggerating what it means to be a woman. And there's also drag kings that sort of exaggerate what it means to be a male. They do this hyper-masculine appearance. You could even say that within the gay leather male community, and just the gay culture is so obsessed with hyper-masculinity, it almost becomes campy. So what they're doing is they're deconstructing social norms, or what society tells us is normal, to reveal inconsistencies in it. To say that, I was born biologically male, but I can put on a big wig and the eyelashes and the high heels, and I am the idealized version of what a woman should be. That just calls attention to the fact that gender is a social construction. And it also calls a lot of drag performers sort of focus on focus of their act is how problematic it is to be a woman. You know, they talk about their boyfriends or whatever. Anyway, so that's just a term there, which I'm not sure if there's going to be a play necessarily that we read that will be able to use this specific concept, but it's interesting to throw out there, floating around. Now, for queer theory specifically, it defies the idea that there's a binary in gender. It argues that sexuality is always a social construction. Homosexual, it should be and, heterosexual, not strict categories. And even they can change from day to day. You wake up one morning, you identify as female. The next, you identify as male. One day, you identify as non-binary. So that idea of fluid sexuality is something that queer theory really capitalizes upon. All right, when I get to the next one, I'm like, wow, is that all I'm going to say about that? Again, I don't have a lot of time in this class, and I wanted to throw these out there, so I'm kind of going quick. African American theory that looks at, in the way that feminism looks at how the patriarchy oppresses women. Queer theories look at how mainstream culture affects queer identified individuals. African American theory looks at people of African American heritage and how the society treats them, the effects of racism and racialism as we have here. So the idea of racialism is that race determines superiority, inferiority. That is, we might say that was racism, but a term that they use to distinguish racialism from racism is just the idea that race, there's something innately true to skin color, which we know is crazy. Racism is unequal power relations, which is very common in our world. So again, two terms you might not ever have to need to know again, but they're there. They're useful if you need them. A few other terms. Institutionalized racism, something that you've all heard of. The idea, I already gave examples of that in sort of the intro. Internalized racism, the self-hatred based on your race. You hate yourself for having a certain color of skin because society tells you that it's not valuable. Intraracial racism, this is something that I'm certainly not qualified to talk about, but just as a concept, for example, the idea that lighter skin African Americans look down upon extremely dark-skinned African Americans. That's, if you really get into the theories and really read all the philosophical writings and look at a lot of the artwork that's created, that's thoroughly rooted in this critical heritage, which is extremely important, that's something that comes up. Again, I don't think it's going to be something that we look at in any of the plays that we read. Possibly, maybe, we'll see once I get around to analyzing them. And the idea of double consciousness, when you belong to two different groups and you feel conflicted. You grew up a very, an African-American child who did not have much money, and you got a scholarship and you ended up going to an Ivy League school. That idea of how you are conflicted, feeling like you owe something to the people that raised you, yet you've now seen this different world that you might want to be a part of. Two conflicting cultures, double consciousness. So if you're going to analyze, I didn't really do this for lesbian and queer, and did I? But questions you might want to ask yourself from a African American perspective. Again, is it intentional, or did they not? Did they really kind of send out conflicting messages? What does the play say about race? And you can say that for queer theory too. What does it teach about African American heritage? Is this play saying something about the history of what it means to be African American? Does the play contribute to the African American canon? Is this something that is important and needs to be included, or is it something that shouldn't? What are the racial politics in place? That's kind of self-explanatory. And what are the poetics that are specific to African American works? Are there certain uses of language, structure, dramatic structure, that are specific to the historically important African American works of art? That's more applicable to African American literary analysis than it might be to queer analysis, because there are certain poetics that we frequently do identify with African American works of art. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about postmodernism, but mostly our discussion of postmodernism is going to come through other videos that I will have you watch, because it's easier to find them for some reason. I looked around for these other theories, and they were all kind of convoluted. But I do want to point out that with all these theories, we're looking at Marxism and these identity theories, you can look at the play in terms of the characters in the world of the play, but you can also look at the play as a product of its time. So, and I'll talk about that when I talk about the different plays. But so I think for our purposes, it might be most useful to simply analyze the plays from the perspective of what the playwright created, as opposed to looking at, for example, if we were looking at Hamlet, you could look at it as the story. How did these people in the story interact from a feminist, from a Marxist, from a whatever perspective? Or you could look at the play Hamlet as a cultural product, and what did it say about the history of the time, about the people that were living at the time, about who came to see that play when it was first produced. So that's two different ways you can apply these theories. They're totally interchangeable, but I think for our purposes we might look at the first one I mentioned, and I'll try to make that clear when I analyze the plays. Now, let me say that I know I've thrown a lot out at you, and with postmodernism, your head's going to explode just a little bit, but I will discuss plays in terms of these theories, and hopefully they will all make a lot more sense. I hope. So, all right, this was longer than I wanted to be, but it was a lot. So, thanks. See ya. Bye.